Hi everyone, I'm back. In this video I'm going to talk to you about Robert Millikan, the American physicist who discovered the charge on an electron. And he did this in around 1909, just around the turn of the century. So this would have been a little over 100 years ago. I'm going to talk about this apparatus that he used to discover the charge on an electron, but I really highly recommend that you watch the animation that I made a link to on Moodle, because I think when you see the experiment in progress, it might make a little bit more sense to you. This is called the Millikan oil drop experiment. So this is how it worked. There was a spray bottle, basically. It's called an atomizer, but what it did is it sprayed a very, very, very fine mist of oil into this chamber. So you can see that oil right there. And the oil droplets would fall because the force of gravity is pulling them down. And there was a little tiny hole right here in this plate. And any oil drops that happened to fall right on top of that hole would fall through the top plate. Off to the side here, you can see this source of ionizing radiation. And basically what that did is it shot X-rays through this chamber. And when the X-rays hit the gas in the chamber, they would cause some of the electrons on the gas particles to separate from the atoms of gas. So you have these free electrons in this chamber, and they would cling to that drop of oil. A similar thing happens when you create static electricity. If you've ever run a comb through your hair in the wintertime and your hair gets all staticky, it's because you've got electrons that are now transferred onto your hair, and so you get that static cling. Well, the same idea happened with this oil drop. So you have to imagine an oil drop with electrons attached to it. So the next thing that happened was Millikan very, very carefully observed this oil drop through a telescope. So here's where the telescope is. And he applied electrical voltage to the upper and lower plates to suspend that oil drop in air. So his goal was to get this oil drop to literally not move, to kind of just hover in the air. And he would keep changing the charge on the plates until he could get that electron to hover. And every time he did this experiment, he found that he always had to change the charge on the plates by a multiple of this number, which happened to be 1.6 times 10 to the negative 19th coulombs. And he realized that this must have been the charge on a single electron. So if there were 15 electrons on there, he would have had to change the charge on the plates by 15 times that number. If there were 2 electrons on there, he would have had to change it by a multiple of twice that number. Now, another thing you have to realize is that there were some times when he was ionizing this gas that it would break apart into electrons and also the positive charged ion that was left over. So sometimes positive charges would get attracted to this oil drop as well. And if the oil drop became overall positively charged, then he would actually have to switch the charge on the plates. So instead of having the positive plate on the top, he would have the negative plate on the top. But if you can just imagine electrons being attracted to that oil drop, then in order for the electrons to be suspended in the air, they would want to be attracted to the positive plate, and that's why there's a positive plate written up there. And they would be repelled by the negative plate, which is down here. So this is a quick explanation of the Millikan oil drop experiment, but again, I really encourage you to watch that animation because that might help you as well. The next section you're going to read about is on Rutherford and the Rutherford-Marsden gold foil experiment. When you look over those notes on pages 6 through 8, you're going to see a checklist of items at the top of page 6 to complete, and there's another checklist on the bottom of page 7, so be sure you do that. By the time you finish page 8, you will need to complete 2 more homework assignments. There's a Moodle on the Millikan oil drop experiment, and there's a Moodle on the gold foil experiment, so make sure you complete those 2 homeworks. The last scientist that you're going to read a little bit about is James Chadwick. He was the English physicist who discovered the neutron, and there are no videos or animations on James Chadwick. So there's an article for you to read that I put on page 9 of your notes, and I want you to read that article and then answer the questions on page 10 that relate to that article, and that's going to give you information about James Chadwick. When you're finished with that, the next thing that you want to do is work on the atomic theory Sudoku puzzle. So there's a bunch of questions there that are going to give you a nice review of the history of atomic theory, and you're going to put your answers together to create a Sudoku puzzle. If you have any difficulty, don't forget to ask me any questions that you need to in class. Good luck!
Made with Doodlecast Pro.